It is the endless, mechanized spine of the American military machine. It is the sound of Detroit, of Cleveland, of South Bend, transplanted to the front lines of freedom. This is not just a story of soldiers. This is the story of the chariots they rode into hell, the greatest assemblage of automotive power the world had ever seen. To understand the magnitude of this fleet, you have to look back at the precipice of 1941. The United States Army was, by modern standards, a horse-drawn constabulary, but across the oceans, the enemy had already mechanized. When the call went out, American industry didn't just answer, it transformed. The automotive titans, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, ceased the production of civilian coupes and sedans. The assembly lines that once birthed the American dream now began to forge the American sword. The goal was total mechanization. The philosophy was simple. No American soldier would walk if he could ride. The story must begin with the icon, the silhouette that every American knows. It started as a frantic government request for a light reconnaissance vehicle. The result was the Willys MB and the Ford GPW. The GIs simply called it the Jeep. It was a marvel of minimalist engineering, with four-wheel drive, a fold-flat windshield, and a frame that could take a beating that would shatter a modern car. The Jeep went everywhere. It was a chaplain's altar, a field ambulance carrying wounded on stretchers across the hood, a mobile command post for generals like Eisenhower, and a machine gun platform for daring raids. It was so light that if it got stuck in the mud, 4 soldiers could physically lift it out. General George C. Marshall called it America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. Over 640,000 were built. It was the mechanical equivalent of the American soldier, scrappy, unpretentious, and impossible to stop. But the Jeep wasn't the only light rider. There was the Harley-Davidson WLA, the Liberator, a 45 cubic inch V-twin workhorse used by messengers braving sniper fire to deliver orders when radio lines were cut. They were the modern cavalry horses, weaving through the chaos of the front lines. While the Jeep and the Harley got the glory, the war was won on the back of the trucks, specifically the GMC CCKW, affectionately known as the Deuce and a Half. Wars are not won by shooting, they are won by supplying. As the Allies raced across France after D-Day, they outran their supply lines. The answer was the Red Ball Express, a non-stop convoy system driven primarily by African-American soldiers who pushed these trucks to the breaking point 24 hours a day. The CCKW was a 2.5-ton, 6x6 beast. It carried ammunition, K-rations, gasoline, and troops. Alongside the GMC was the Studebaker US-6, a truck so rugged that while the US kept the GMCs, they sent the Studebakers to the Soviet Union via Lend-Lease. The Russian Red Army drove into Berlin largely on the wheels of American Studebakers. Then there was the Dodge WC series, the 3/4-ton trucks. These were the heavy-duty big brothers to the Jeep. They were weapon carriers, command cars, and telephone line installers. If the Jeep was the legs of the Army, the trucks were its strong back, carrying the weight of liberation mile after muddy mile. Then there was the armor. The debate rages to this day regarding the M4 Sherman. Critics pointed out that it was outgunned by the German Tigers and Panthers. They called them Ronsons because of their tendency to burn. But this ignores the genius of the Sherman. The M4 was reliability incarnate. While German tanks were over-engineered monsters that broke down and couldn't cross bridges, the Sherman was fast, mechanically reliable, and easily transported across the ocean. We built nearly 50,000 of them. When a Tiger tank destroyed a Sherman, 2 more appeared over the Rich. Late war variants, like the Easy 8 with the high-velocity 76mm gun and wider tracks, evened the playing field significantly. The Sherman was the tank that could actually get to the fight day after day. But U.S. doctrine didn't just rely on tanks to fight tanks. That was the job of the tank destroyers. The M10 Wolverine and the lightning-fast M18 Hellcat were designed to ambush enemy armor and scoot away. The Hellcat could hit 55 miles per hour on roads, running circles around the heavy German steel. Later, the M26 Jackson brought a 90mm gun to the fight, capable of blowing the turret off a Tiger from a mile away. Bridging the gap between truck and tank was the half-track. The M3 half-track became the ubiquitous armored personnel carrier of the war. With wheels in the front for steering and tracks in the back for traction, it hauled infantry squads into the heat of battle while shielding them from small arms fire. They were versatile platforms, often mounted with quad 50 caliber machine guns, the M16 MGCC, known as meat choppers for their ability to shred enemy aircraft or suppress infantry. Scouting ahead of these columns was the M8 Greyhound, a six-wheeled armored car that looked like it was moving fast even when standing still. It was the eyes and ears of Patton's Third Army, racing down French roads to find where the enemy was hiding, often engaging with light tanks despite its thin armor. This was a global war, and that meant crossing water. The Pacific Theater and the landings at Normandy required a new breed of vehicle. Enter the DUKW, widely known as the Duck. It looked like a tub on wheels, a six-wheel drive amphibious truck that could drive off a supply ship, swim through the surf, and drive up onto the beach. It revolutionized logistics. For the Marines facing the coral atolls of the Pacific, the LVT, or Amtrak, was the difference between life and death. Originally designed as a swamp rescue vehicle in Florida, the military up-armored it. Unlike boats, the LVT could claw its way over coral reefs and trundle up the beach, providing fire support with mounted howitzers and flamethrowers. It was the vehicle that unlocked the island-hopping strategy. Finally, there were the monsters of the engineering corps. The M26 Dragon Wagon was a massive armored tractor-trailer designed to recover disabled tanks. It was a beast of a machine, with a cab that looked like a concrete bunker on wheels, hauling 40-ton tanks out of the mud to be repaired and sent back to the line. There were the bulldozers, often unprotected Caterpillar D7s, adapted for military use, driven by Seabees who carved airfields out of jungles while snipers took potshots at them. These unsung mechanical heroes paved the road to Tokyo and Berlin. By 1945, the noise of the engines began to fade, replaced by the silence of peace. The United States had produced over 2.4 million trucks, 640,000 Jeeps, and 88,000 tanks. The story of U.S. vehicles in World War II is not just a list of specifications or calibers. It is a testament to American ingenuity and the ability to scale production to unimaginable heights. It was the democratization of mobility. We put the entire army on wheels. We took the boy from a farm in Kansas who grew up fixing tractors and the kid from Brooklyn who worked in a garage, and we gave them machines they could understand, fix with a wrench and a prayer, and drive to victory. These vehicles didn't just carry men, they carried the spirit of a nation that refused to yield. Today, you might see a restored Willys Jeep in a parade, or a rusty Sherman sitting as a monument in a town square. They are silent now, but if you listen closely, you can still hear the hum, the sound of the machine that saved the world.